Hey there everyone, Mychal A. Bryan here from the Oraculos School of Astrology, and today we're going to be diving into some Horary Astrology sample chart from my client practice in preparation for our upcoming Horary Astrology Certification Program, which begins January 10th, 2026. Now, Horary Astrology is a huge cornerstone of my astrological practice because divination in general is a huge cornerstone of my astrological practice. And the first presentations I started doing in America as far as astrology was concerned was Horary Astrology. My very first astrological conference that I spoke at, the title of that talk was Horary Astrology and the Natal Promise. And years later, I wrote this book, Horary Astrology and the Natal Promise. So if you haven't gotten yourself a copy of this book as yet, please make sure to do so, because this really is, for me, my magnum opus as far as divination is concerned. And there's a lovely introductory chapter in here on divination that I think gives a wonderful orientation to my entire divinational approach. Now, today we're going to be diving into a Horary Astrology chart about a topic that I think is important to a lot of us, and that is the topic of love. One of the things I think is really important for us to know as astrologers is that people usually only come to astrology for one of five major topics. And those five major topics are, who am I, and what's going on within this vehicle of myself, whether that is emotionally or physiologically or in some other way that impacts my personal well-being. Me, that's a big topic of discussion. Who am I? What's going on inside of me? How long is it going to take for me to move through this particular illness or issue I have going on? Those are topics that people really care about. Another topic that people care about is their money. Am I going to be rich? Will I make money from this particular business venture? Is this the right thing for me to be doing financially? Should I invest in this project? Money is a big topic for people, and that's another hot topic that people come to us for. Career. What is my profession within this lifetime? What should I be doing? How should I be investing my time and my efforts as far as my studies are concerned? What should I study? What's going to take me in the direction of where my soul will be most fulfilled career-wise? Career is another big topic for people. And I think within the 21st century, especially in the last 5 years or so, definitely since 2020, there's been this deep angst that people have been having about their ancestry and particularly their own family trauma. So the questions that we've been hearing a lot, or that I've been hearing a lot in the last 5 years, has been, what is the source of this wound within my family? How can I heal this wound between myself and my mother? How can I get in the gap of this rift that's occurring within my family and heal the rift that's going on there? What is the impact that my narcissistic mother had on me, and how can I ensure that I don't pass that on to my children? These are questions that people have been asking. However, there is no group of questions that people ask the most or more than questions regarding love and romance. I think this is true from a natal astrology perspective. I also think this is true from a Horary astrology perspective. It seems like the topic of love is just such an angst-filled topic in general that people are just constantly drawn to asking questions regarding love, no matter what season or what decade or what era of astrology we're in. This topic of, who am I going to marry? Is this person my soulmate? Am I right for leaving this person? Should I divorce this person? All of these questions that specifically have to do with our intimate relationships are questions that people ask more than any other questions within Horary astrology, and I dare say within astrology in general. So today we're going to be diving in by taking a look at a love horary and at love horaries in general, so that we can see what are some of the basic things that we look for when looking at these horary charts, and so that you can also have a sense of the sort of in-depth horary work that we're going to be doing in our upcoming Horary Astrology Diploma Program, which begins this January 10th, 2026. So first up, we have this chart for a lady who came to me, and her question was, should we marry? She was a foreigner who was living in Jamaica at the time, and she was in a relationship with a Jamaican guy. And the relationship that they had was precarious, to say the least. He also wasn't the greatest person in the world, and he was quite problematic, truth be told. So she found herself in a position where she was doing far too much to be in the relationship to begin with, where she had relocated to this small island nation in order to facilitate this relationship with him, and where she was sacrificing a lot, essentially, in order to be in that relationship with a person who was, like I said, fundamentally problematic and really a troubling person to be with. So her question was, should we marry? Now, when it comes to horary astrology, different people do things differently. I cast the chart for my time and my location, where I am at the moment of me receiving and understanding the question. As far as divination is concerned, it's not sufficient for us to receive a question. We also have to understand the question, because as a diviner, you are essentially stepping into the gap for a person, between that person and whatever divine intelligence you are calling upon in the moment of divination to perform that work. So in order for us to actually perform good divination, we need to not only have received a question from somebody, because the question is the catalyst for the moment of divination, but we also need to understand that question, because you are an interpreter. And just as much as you are interpreting the message from the divine for that person, you are also interpreting that person's question for the divine. And if that question doesn't make sense within yourself, then that question just isn't going to be something that you can answer adequately, essentially. So that's part one. People struggle when it comes to making good questions. And oftentimes, people are struggling when it comes to making good questions because the question that they want to ask is so confronting and so revealing. And the fact that they're even asking that question, it reveals a deeper issue or a deeper problem that needs to be resolved somewhere else in their lives, that people will, for lack of a better word, pussyfoot around the core question that they want to ask, because it is easier for me to pussyfoot than it is for me to actually specifically ask the exact thing that I want to know. We oftentimes see this happening when people are going to get divorced, for example, or when people are at the end of a relationship. They make this big, elaborate shtick of asking a question that makes no sense at all. And oftentimes, when people are at the end of their relationship or their marriage or their whatever, and they go for any sort of divination, their question sounds like, what is it the universe desires for me to know right now as far as my complete fulfillment and stepping forward as a radiant human being within this lifetime, free of attachment and standing fully within my truth and my purpose and my passion and all that is meaningful and pure for me? What does that even mean? It doesn't mean anything. It does not mean anything, because what you really want to ask is, should I be divorcing my husband? That is the question. So all of this additional questioning around doesn't make any sense. Luckily, within the context of this lady was very clear that she specifically wanted to know, should I even be marrying this person? So that was that, and we were good to go. But in general, as a horary astrologer, as a Kabbalistic tarot reader, as a geomancer, as an I Ching practitioner, and it's I Ching, it's not I Ching, and it's also not even Ching, it's I Ching, but that's a different story for a different day. As an I Ching consultant, we need a pure, solid, salient question that we can sink our teeth into, that will give us the juice that we need to turn on the cosmic question answering machine that exists within the heart of our universe. So the question was, should we marry? Within horary astrology, and certain horary astrology circles in particular, there's this understanding that you already can know the outcome of a question based on understanding the querent and based on understanding how the querent is showing up within the specific question. And the querent, as we know from a traditional divination perspective, because the term querent isn't specific to Horary astrology, the term querent is specific to all systems of divination. The person who is asking the question is known as the querent, Querent, not querent, not any other iteration of that word. It is querent, like how we say queries for questions. The querent is the person questioning. So, if you can understand what's going on with the querent, chances are you also will understand the outcome of the question. Now, I'm not saying that this is something that's going to work 1,000% of the times, but I am saying that this is something that works very often. That if you see within a chart that the significator of the querent really isn't doing well at all, by no stretch of imagination is that person looking as if they're doing well within the chart itself, chances are it's highly unlikely that at the end of the day there's going to be some massive victory lap that they do, because there are far too many factors that are standing in the way of that victory. Even if you do find a wonderfully soft aspect that is joining the querent to the thing that the querent desires, if we see an overwhelming amount of challenges or obstacles standing within a person's way, chances are the end result of the situation are also going to be challenging and obstacle filled. And that's true for all systems of astrology. Like I say, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and sounds like a duck, chances are it is a duck. And we do ourselves a disservice when we try to tell people, no, it's actually a cat, when every single thing else has pointed in the direction to that being a D-U-C-K duck. So, querent first. How do we go about this within Horary astrology? The house that we start all of our inquiries from an astrological perspective, and I dare say from a traditional astrological perspective, is going to be the first house. There's literally a number 1 present there, and there's a number 1 present there because that is the house that we should be starting from, the first house. So I start from my first house because the first house is representing the person for whom the act of divination is being done. So we start from the first house. In Horary astrology, in medical astrology, in natal astrology, in any type of astrology, our starting place from a traditional astrological perspective is really the first house, because the first house is representing who the chart was cast for. Who in terms of a nation, if we're asking a mundane astrology question via a mundane astrology chart, who from the perspective of the birth chart, and who from the perspective of the horary chart. So we start with the first house. Now, in horary astrology, this is where we start to learn the significance of the planets as specific significators. A specific significator is going to be a planet whose job is to specifically signify things that correspond with the house that it rules. Thus, in this chart, we see Libra on the cusp of the first house, 22 degrees Libra, 18 minutes on the cusp of the first house. Therefore, the owner of this first house, the specific significator of this first house, the planet whose job it is to represent the querent within the entirety of the delineation of this chart, is going to be the planet that is the specific domicile ruler of Libra. And we know that that planet is Venus, and here we have Venus at 27 degrees of Pisces, Piscis, 27 degrees of Pisces, 55 minutes in the 6th house. So this is our starting point, understanding who the specific significator of the house is. Planets can either be specific significators, meaning they are the rulers of houses, or they can be universal significators, meaning they universally signify a topic. So for example, the sun universally signifies wealth, but in this specific chart, the specific signification of the sun is to signify the friends of the querent. because the sun is the specific domicile ruler of the 11th house, based on the fact that on the cusp of the 11th house, we find 23 degrees Leo, 24 minutes. Thus, the sun is the specific significator of friends and friendships, even though in general, the sun is the universal significator of the father. And horary astrology, I dare say 80% of horary work is rooted within this understanding of the planets as specific significators. So the very first thing that we want to do from a horary perspective is go and assess the nature of the planet that is representing the querent. And here I see this planet is Venus at 27 degrees Pisces, 55 minutes. Now, my students know I would never say that in that way, because when we're learning horary astrology, we are learning the foundations of classical astrology. Horary astrology is not an advanced astrological skill. It's not something that you learn at the end of your astrological journey. There really is nothing advanced about horary astrology at all. And this is something that we find as far back as the medieval period, when they talk about divination and the role that divination plays within the larger unfolding of an astrologer's practice. At its most basic level, the purpose of the divination is to say yes or no. And there's nothing advanced about saying that yes or no at all. Surely there are many factors that you need to know in order to say that, but the purpose of divination as a practice is to get astrologers in a frame of mind where they understand how to say yes or no. Because that understanding of how to say yes or no is something that we then take into our natal astrology practice, not the other way around. We don't really take natal astrological skills into our horary astrology practice. We take the clarity and the precision thinking of horary astrology and we transpose that to our natal astrology practice. So, in a world of what came first, the chicken or the egg, after learning the foundations of classical astrology, we then go into learning horary astrology as a means of exercising those foundational principles and skills, and also as a means of getting us in a frame of mind where we can clearly say yes or no. That ability to say yes or no clearly as an astrologer comes from no other place in the astrological kingdom other than the practice of horary astrology. No other astrological proficiency will give you the ability to clearly think in the way that horary astrology will, which is why the Oraculos School of Astrology, we teach horary astrology first, because I need my students to be able to be decisive and to be sharp and to be convicted, essentially, in what judgment they're coming up with, and not just because they believe in their own smoke or they believe in their own self-importance, but because they know that they would have done a thorough job at weighing all of the factors present in coming to that yes or no. And that is what horary astrology gives us, and that is what we take into every other field of our astrological practice. So here I see in this question, should we marry? I see the rule of the ascendant is essentially dignified Venus at 27 degrees Pisces, 55 minutes, and accidentally debilitated in the 6th house of sickness and slavery. That would be the phrase that an oracular student says when they're studying a horary chart. So what does this mean for this Venus to be essentially dignified? In general, when I see this and I see the Venus is essentially dignified, I start off by saying the querent is in a good state. Why is the querent in a good state? Because Venus in Pisces is Venus in the sign of her exaltation. Now, as far as horary astrology is concerned, the ancients have an aphorism that says that a planet in its exaltation is like a man who is haughty and proud, who is assuming more of himself than is his rightful due. When a planet is exalted, that planet is having an internal sense of itself that makes it feel larger than life, that makes it feel larger than the realities of its circumstances around itself, that makes it feel somehow puffed up and proud and haughty, and that doesn't necessarily give that planet the greatest sense of being rooted in this material world. So, as we look at this chart, we might say, hey, this person or this native has a sense of herself that she is essentially the creme de la creme as far as this guy is concerned, or that she is essentially bringing more to this relationship or standing in this relationship as if she herself is on a pedestal that may not actually be justified based on who she is, or that may not actually be justified based on what she's actually bringing to the table. So as far as a sense of her own self-image within the relationship is concerned, she might see herself as this exalted Venus in Pisces, not necessarily seeing herself in a more grounded, stable, and pragmatic way, and probably also over-hyping the level of bounty or the level of abundance or the level of blessedness she brings with her in the process of stepping into this relationship. So that's what we have to say to her as far as this Venus in Pisces is concerned. Now, the reality is, who's going to say that to somebody? Not I, said the cat. Because when a client comes to us, oftentimes people aren't necessarily coming to us to hear the things about themselves that are challenging. They're coming to us to hear things about everybody else that's challenging. So one of the rules in Horary Astrology, and I think in any type of astrology, is that if you're going to talk to somebody, that we talk to that person in a way that we ourselves would like to be spoken to. So I can't remember exactly what I said during this reading, but I'm pretty sure that I would have said to her, hey, it could be useful for you, as you acknowledge that you're in a challenging relationship with this person, that you also take a self-inventory to see how you're showing up in the relationship and to see some of the ways how your own self-identity or your own way of talking about yourself, viewing yourself, or identifying yourself within this relationship is also adding to some of the things that make this relationship a less uncomfortable place for both you and this person to exist. So that's how I would have said it. Because when we are in an astrological lab, what we know within our brain and what we say out of our mouths should be two completely different things. So when I'm sitting in this sort of space amongst astrologers and reading this chart from a cold, dissective perspective, I can say the things in a way that is cold and that doesn't carry care or compassion. But when I'm sitting with a client, I have to say to myself, Mychal, how can you bring this information across in a way that will actually be useful, in a way that will be hearable, and in a way that isn't going to make this person upset, fundamentally. And while people being upset, people are going to get upset, they're going to get upset, but in a way that isn't unnecessarily causing upset in a world where there's already enough necessary upset to begin with, given the context of the question that she's asked. So that's the very first thing that we do. We want to assess what is the state of the client based on the essential dignity of the planet that is signifying that client. And this is going to be true for all the other topics. If this person were asking about money and we wanted to assess the money, our first thing would be to assess the essential dignity of the planet that specifically rules the money, which would be the Mars, as we know in this case, because in this chart, we have 20 degrees of Scorpio on the cusp of the second house, and therefore Mars is the ruler of that second house. So these are things that we just want to lead with as far as our Horary astrology practice is concerned. Now, after we've assessed what's going on with the client based on the essential dignity of the client, or rather based on the essential dignity of the planet that signifies the client, we also then want to have an understanding of what is going on environmentally. Because it's not enough for somebody to be doing good on the inside. That person also needs to have a sense of environmental support to help bolster them and help support them in whatever it is they're seeking to accomplish. You could have all of the best skills and abilities and tools inside of yourself. But if you're in an environment that doesn't have the ability to accept those skills and accept those abilities and accept those tools, then might as well you just flush them down the toilet. Because the reality is, if your environment cannot receive what you have to share with that environment, then what you have to share with that environment has no place to materialize or express itself outwardly. And if it isn't having any place to express itself outwardly, it's like, why does it even exist, basically? So we have this Venus essentially dignified because she's exalted, but she's also present within the sixth house of sickness and stress. So when a person is located within the sixth house of sickness and stress, it doesn't matter how good they're doing on the inside, that is completely squelched within them because they have nowhere to express it externally. So what we can say to her is, you may feel frustrated. And this is also a traditional astrological aphorism, that if a planet is very strongly, essentially dignified, meaning it's in its domicile or its exaltation, however, it finds itself within a bad house, for lack of a better word, or one of these houses that do not aspect the ascendant, then it is as if that person is vexed and frustrated within themselves. And the aphorism doesn't go much further than that. But one can imagine that, of course, you'd be vexed and frustrated within yourself because you have all of this power inside of you, but externally, you're operating from a house that doesn't have any ability to even be seen. And we know that the houses that don't have any ability to be seen are the houses that do not aspect the first house or the ascendant. And those houses are the sixth house, the eighth house, and the 12th house. Now, technically speaking, the aphorism says that when a planet is essentially dignified but in a cadent house, it is as if that person is vexed and frustrated. Clearly, because the cadent houses are the weakest houses of heaven. But we know that amongst the cadent houses, the third house is strong by virtue of its sextile relationship to the ascendant. And we know that the ninth house is similarly strong by virtue of its trine relationship to the ascendant. So, not all cadent houses are made equally. So when we hear the ancients saying awful things about the cadent houses, I think it's useful for us to remember within ourselves that they're really not talking about the third house and the ninth house within that. You might say, well, why do they just say the cadent houses without any discrimination? Why do they just use that language? And the reason for that is because we as astrologers are meant to know that these cadent houses are definitely going to be houses that have less power than any other house. So the cadent houses collectively are weaker than the succedent houses, and they are weaker than the angular houses. So even though the third and the ninth house have aspects to the ascendant and are therefore strong because of that, they're still considered to be weak houses by virtue of the fact that they are cadent. But we, as actual practitioners in the field, need to know that when we hear that aphorism that planets in cadent houses are vexed and frustrated because they have no relationship to the ascendant, we need to know that that specifically is applying to the sixth house and the 12th house. Now, in that aphorism, I think we should also apply the eighth house, because we know the eighth house has no aspect relationship to the ascendant. So as far as I'm concerned, that aphorism, if I could reword it, I would say that when planets are in the sixth house, the eighth house, and the 12th house, they are vexed and frustrated because of not having an aspectual relationship to the ascendant, is what I would say. So she is in the sixth house. Where the ruler of the ascendant is located is representing a bed of psychic focus within that person's life. But we can also say, by extension of this, that you may also find yourself in a situation where you feel overly stressed out. You may feel as if you are a slave within the situation. You may feel as if you are overworked and undervalued, and as if you aren't actually getting adequately compensated for the level of time and effort and energy that you are investing into this person. You may feel as if this person isn't even giving you any level of acknowledgement that makes you feel worthy and beautiful and bold. All of these wonderful things you think about yourself within yourself. Once again, Venus is exalted. So all of these wonderful things you think about yourself, I'm so pretty, I'm so beautiful, I'm such a catch, I bring such good things to this relationship. In the process of thinking those things, you might be thinking those things because your partner isn't acknowledging any of those things for you externally. Therefore, all you are left with is the feeling that you have to acknowledge those things for yourself. All you are left with is the sense that you need to say to yourself how pretty you are because your partner sees you and is viewing you through a lens that causes you to feel like refuse, that causes you to feel like a slave, that causes you to feel like just another one of his cronies, just going around the world doing his bidding and making sure that he has clean underwear, but it's not actually leaving you in a place where you feel as externally exalted as you feel within yourself. And as a result of that, this is contributing to the level of stress and the level of suffering you find yourself experiencing within this situation. That is me bringing this information down the ladder of abstraction and making it more useful for the client who I'm serving with this reading. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for part 1 of this Horary Astrology video series where I take a deep dive into charts that I have assessed within my client practice. We're going to be looking at part 2 of the same chart where we take a look at the house of the Quesited within this relationship horary. So please make sure that you stay tuned and also make sure to like and subscribe to the Oraculos podcast wherever you find us on the internet, so that you can keep your finger on the pulse of all of these wonderful and magical offerings we have here at the Oraculos School of Astrology. And once again, this Horary Astrology series is being done so that you can join us on January 10th, 2026 for our upcoming Horary Astrology Certification Program, in which I dive very deeply into the heart of everything that we do at the Oraculos School of Astrology as far as Horary Astrology is concerned. I've never thought of packaging this in this way before as a certificate program because in my mind, Horary Astrology was never an end within itself. It always was a means to an end, and the actual end was creating robust, clear, clean, warrior-like, warrior, warrior-like, soldier-like astrologers who were proficient and profound and excellent at natal astrology and predictive astrology. That has always been my goal at the Oraculos School of Astrology, and I feel as if I've done a very good job at doing that over the years. However, Horary Astrology can also be that. And while in my consciousness, Horary Astrology should support a larger natal astrological practice, there are many moments where we do not have access to the birth chart. And in those moments, Horary Astrology has always been a powerful recourse for the astrological community. So if you want to become a predictive astrologer from a horary perspective, and if you want to become a professional astrologer and you probably don't have time to spend 2 years studying with me, then join us in our Horary Astrology Certificate Program, where I'll be guiding you through everything that we do at the Oraculos School of Astrology as far as Horary Astrology is concerned, so that you can enter Horary Astrology practice as a sparkling professional within this astrological community. Thanks, everybody. See you soon. Bye-bye.